Hello. I would like you to join me for an investigation into the commentaries using evangelicalism today and what they say about Mark 16:9-20. This is part 2 of the series. In the next 20 minutes, we should look at about 8 commentaries. I will read some and stop when I find errors. But first, I would like to read from the Eastern Orthodox Bible, New Testament, which includes Mark 16:9-20 and the text, unlike the initial publication of the RSV. It says at Mark 16:9, this footnote. The last 12 verses, 16:9-20, are not present in some ancient manuscripts, including the 4th century Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. Although the omission has unusual features that make the absence of the longer ending less than decisive. Mark 16:9-20 is preserved in its traditional form in about a dozen uncials, the others being Codex Alexandrinus, and in all unimaged minuscules. The longer ending is generally considered not considered to have undisputable canonical authority, but it is part of the patriarchal text. It is attested by ancient and widespread liturgical use. It is therefore included in the main EOB text as being part of the received text of the Gospel of Mark. I would say this is a very good footnote, but it can be improved. You could supply the identity of those early patristic writers, such as Irenaeus, who wrote over a century before the earliest manuscripts of Mark 16. Also, the number of manuscripts. We say some ancient manuscripts omit verse 9-20, including Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. Well, when you say Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, you've said them all. There are no other Greek manuscripts that omit verses 9-20. And I've shown in another video, you can see in Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, the scribes of both manuscripts were aware of these verses. Now let's look at Edward Schweitzer. He says regarding this passage the following. On page 370, hold on, page is shaky. He says, page 379, referring to the shorter ending, he says, talking nothing about its attestation. Let's look at it a little further. He says about verse 9-20 that the text had already become so much a part of public worship, it was no longer necessary to say who actually appeared. We cannot be sure whether something else originally preceded this conclusion. And he goes on, but he doesn't really discuss the external evidence in detail. It is basically a waste of time because you can't learn when we don't actually discuss the passage. He does say on page 374, unquestionably, this passage is a later addition. Well, I don't grant that. I do not grant that. Instead of arguing, he simply asserts. He says it is not found in the oldest manuscripts. Well, it's found in over 1,650 manuscripts. It's missing in 2. Granted, these 2 are from the 300s, but also recently granted, it was in the manuscript of Irenaeus, Justin, and Tatian in the 100s. Simple observation that the manuscript didn't survive, but the quotation did, does not erase the fact that in the manuscripts they had Mark 16:19-20. Why should the durability of the material that the manuscript was written on, why should that be a factor? Anyway, Schweitzer says the following. It is not found in the oldest manuscripts. A few church fathers were acquainted with its ending. Now by a few, he must mean over 40, because that's how many patriarch courses before the fall of Rome in 46. That's how many used this manuscript, this passage. Now, this is abundant attestation, but he minimizes it. For what reason? I believe it's to get the people to reject the passage, because if you would see the abundance of evidence for the passage, you would say, this is part of the Word of God. He says, the designation of Jesus as the Lord is not typical of Mark. Does it seem to him that Luke should be questioned because Luke in Luke 24 is not typical of Luke? This reasoning is specious, and his presentation of the evidence is practically it is rather unsatisfactory. Onward to the next one. Here we have Cynthia A. Jarvis and E. Elizabeth Johnson are the editors. A feasting on the World Commentary, feasting on the Gospels, Mark. Let's dive in. Now, this is a commentary that gives a theological perspective, a pastoral perspective, an exegetical perspective, and a homiletical perspective. Now, interestingly, these 4 different columns, although they're edited, they contradict themselves, because in the theological column, it says, it is common in scholarly circles to speak of this passage as a later addition to the text. In the very next column, it says, in these final verses of Mark's Gospel. But which is it? Are you supposed to think in private, we're going to say it's a later edition, and then in public say it's part of Mark's Gospel? That would be lying. We need to be solid at every level. So right away, I would say this can't be questioned. But let's go into detail. In the third column, English readers of Mark's Gospel may notice unusual notations within the text of the last chapter of Mark. While the 2 oldest complete manuscripts of Mark end with 16:8, there are other early manuscripts that include additional verses, which we know as 16:9-20. In many translations, 2 sentences are included between 16:8 and 16:9. Now here we see reference to what is known as the shorter ending, which is between 16:8 and 16:9 in about 8 Greek manuscripts. 8 out of that's I believe less than 1%. We have over 1,650 manuscripts of Mark. So if 800 would be 8 out of 800 would be 1%. So this is less than 1%. But here it's described as in many translations. So the average reader is going to get the wrong impression. The author of the exegetical perspective, that's by the way, I will identify who it is. Mary Luty, L-U-T-I. So Mary Luty is writing. Oh no, hold on. Judy Gates Siker, S-I-K-E-R, is writing the exegetical perspective, and she says the following. While most scholars agree that the original ending of the Gospel is verse 8, Scholars do not agree on why the Gospel ends so abruptly on the original authorship of verses 9 through 20. If Mark 16:1 through 8 is the original ending of Mark, many questions remain for the reader. She goes on to say, whatever questions are left by 16:1 through 8 are addressed and answered in 16:9 through 20. So, think about that. Whatever questions are left by 16:1 through 8 are addressed and answered in 16:9 through 20. In other words, Psycho says these two parts of chapter 16 fit together well, as an author would, that's what an author would do. She says next, after verse 14, after verses 12 through 13, she says, next we find a third telling of a resurrection appearance. Verse 14 describes Jesus reprimanding those who refused to believe the ones to whom Jesus had appeared. Thus we move from no resurrection appearances in 16:1 through 8 to 3 in the longer ending. Now again, I see virtually no in-depth discussion of the external evidence. Everything is assumed to be all cut and dried. We never get, nobody can see from this, a commentary, in detail, anything about the external evidence. The details are lacking. Let's see what we can find in Francis J. Valloni's Commentary on Mark. Here. The Commentary on Mark 16:1 through 8 argued that the original Gospel of Mark closed, surprisingly, with the flight of the frightened woman in 16:8. The textual, literary, and theological arguments in defense of this position have been provided in the course of the commentary. Paradoxically, although it is certain that the author of Mark 1:1 through 16:8 played no part in the composition of 16:9 through 20, many Christian lectionaries use this passage each year as the Gospel lection on the Feast of St. Mark on April 25th. Now, already, I believe that assertions are being made, not arguments, simply assertions. Although it is certain that an author of Mark 1 through 16:8 played no part in the composition of 16:9-20, I do not grant that at all. And for details, see my book, The Authentic The Case for Mark 16:9-20. But to continue, let's read what he says in the footnotes. And we'll see the source of his information. Is it the evidence or simply what Bruce Mesker said? He says there are a number of endings, among which verses 9 to 20 is probably the oldest and has been most widely accepted. In 1546, it was declared part of the Catholic canon of sacred scripture at the Council of Trent. The so-called shorter ending is sometimes found immediately after verse 8, thus concluding the Gospel, or as a final conclusion to the longer ending, i.e. after verse 20. Wrong. Maloney doesn't know anything about it other than what he's read. He never consulted the manuscripts directly. Again, we have a parrot. We have another parrot. Francis J. Maloney, you should be ashamed of yourself. Do your own research. You're supposed to be doing the work yourself, not just echoing others. So, Molly, the fact is, the longer ending, no, let me get back to where I was. When he says that the shorter ending is sometimes concludes the Gospel, that never happens in Greek. All 8 copies that have the shorter ending are followed by the longer ending, followed by verse 9. So that part is wrong. He has read Mesker, an old edition, and never tested the claim. He's not being a commentator, he's being a parrot. When he says it is sometimes found as a final conclusion to the longer ending after verse 8:20, false. Liar. Well, sorry. Misinformer. Misleader. The short ending is never found after verse 20. He has read a footnote in Master's commentary and never bothered to find out is he telling the truth or not. Metzger, at least, sometimes made the effort to test his data. And when he did, he made an affirmation, it's wrong. Now, his books may be poorly edited, because he still to this day has on one page making the retraction, and on the other page making the false statement. But at least he tried. Maloney? Your footnote is lying to me. Well, your footnote is misinforming me. Or your footnote would be misinforming me if I knew as little as you. Don't trust this. Next. D.E. Nineham says, although these verses appear in most of the extant manuscripts of Mark, RSV is certainly right in treating them as a spurious and relegating them to the margin. Perhaps this had not aged well, because the RSV, after realizing what a bad decision they made, in the next edition, put the verses back in the text. He writes, some of our best manuscripts of Mark end at 16:8. Other manuscripts agree with him in omitting verses 9 through 20. Wrong. Misinformer. I was a liar, but I would just say he's ignorant. He never checked the evidence. He's a parrot. Nineham. All you people out there who are last name is Nineham, you should be ashamed. Somebody should have come to him and said, hey, doctor, have you ever tested that claim? Have you tested what you say? Some of our best manuscripts of Mark end at 16:8. Others agree with them in verses 9 through 20. No. The fact is, 2 manuscripts stop at verse 8. All of the others, over 1,600, include verses 9 through 20. How many have the alternative ending, that is the shorter ending, without verses 9 through 20? None. 0. None. How publishers get away with this, how people end up teaching this in schools. Next. Let's see what Grant Osborne says. Now, a commentary on Mark should be about the Gospel of Mark. Instead, we get comments about other commentaries. He says, the vast majority of scholars agree. This is page 324. Grant Osborne. The vast majority of scholars agree that the longer and shorter endings were not originally part of Mark's Gospel. Now, I would say that's true, but that's because so many scholars are simply misinformed because so many have been misled by Metzger. Back up, people. Actually do your work. Don't just parrot. Now, Grant Osborne says, in terms of manuscript evidence, verses 9 to 20 are omitted from Sinaiticus and B, that's Vaticanus, as well as the Old Latin Barbiensis. Now, when I say Barbiensis, in case you don't know, that's the worst transcribed copy of the Gospel of Mark in existence. So, saying it's omitted from Barbiensis, saying that's a good thing, you know how bad Barbiensis is. Its text is very badly transcribed. Then he says, Clement of Alexandria and Origen seem ignorant of it. Again, that basically means nothing. That's an argument for silence, first of all. Second of all, Clement hardly ever uses Mark outside of chapter 10. So the fact that he doesn't use this 12-verse segment means nothing because there are many other 12-verse segments of Mark Clement never uses. How much should we expect him to use? Osborne doesn't seem to care. As for Origen, look in his Philokalia, chapter 5, and you'll see very, very suggestive references that seem to fit in very well with Mark 16:9-20. But even if he doesn't use it, there are other huge segments of Mark that Origen does not use. Not using this segment says nothing about whether or not Origen had it in his copies. And then we have the same old recycled messenger, saying that Eusebius and Jerome say it's missing in most manuscripts in their possession. That's not what they say. Eusebius quotes Mark 16:9 twice in his letter to Marinus. He's also perfectly aware, from what Marinus told him, that Marinus had it in his copies. What we don't see anywhere in this is anything about Irenaeus, anything about the notation. It's just simply selection is evidence. The way that Mark Osborne has selected the evidence, only giving one side of the story, is, frankly, very disappointing. Next. Eugene Nida, a translator's handbook on the Gospel of Mark. This has been used by many people all around the world, translating the Gospel of Mark into other languages. But Eugene Nida says, once we get there, the longer ending, conventionally printed as verses 9-20 of chapter 16, is found in most manuscripts and versions. True. It is omitted by the two most ancient manuscripts of the New Testament, Codex Vaticanus and Codex Sinaiticus, both of the 4th century, that's the 300s. By the oldest Syriac version of the Gospel, that's the Sinaitic Syriac. And by important codices of the Armenian, Ethiopic, and Georgian versions. Nope, wrong. His claim about Ethiopic manuscripts is simply false. Again, he's simply echoing somebody else. He has not looked into it himself. He is being a parrot. Now, I looked into these and found none that go into detail sufficiently. None that give a numerical count. None that mention the evidence from the 2nd century. Robert Stein goes into detail about that in another book. I will look into his detailed evidence and his lack of... Well, no, I rephrase that. I will look into the mistakes that Robert Stein makes in another video. For now, I hope that this has been informative and educational. Say, basically, when it comes to commentaries by evangelicals, don't trust them, because almost every single one is simply a parrot of the now obsolete textual commentary by Bruce Metzger. The textual commentary on the Gospel's Greek archetype that I'm writing will be available, at least in a early form, by the end of the year, God willing. Thank you for taking this time. Please like and subscribe. And please share this with your friends. Bye.